Hello. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. I will start the presentation by saying that what I'm going to be talking about is an iceberg. Is that we are all living outside of reality. And that is because the way the communication works in LLMs is not what it seems. So I've created, or the rough foundation, we've created this app. On the one hand, we have the behavior lab that will allow us to compare the behavior of different LLMs. And I won't demo that today, I won't show it. But the idea is that you're able to select multiple LLMs from the cloud or from local and see how they behave. And you might have some that are pre-fine-tuned and compare them with fine-tune. You can compare small models to your use case, etc. But the focus today is on energy. And when we explore the energy impact of LLMs, we carry with us a certain naive picture where we communicate basically and we count the prompts that we send and the prompts that we receive. And this is what we see. We see our query and our response. And most academic research counts this way. Most tooling for measuring the impact of tokens counts this way. So you put in your query and we can say, I've got Quen running, explain LLM inference. And then I run the energy, the test. In this case, I get my answer and it comes out in Chinese because we're missing a system prompt. We'll come back to that. So we've got this. And if you sort of look at it, you see here in our token analysis that we've got 9 tokens of input, and here's the first bit of the iceberg, a tiny iceberg overhead which is the kind of template, the chat template that gets injected behind the scenes. But you've got 302 tokens for output and 9 of input. That's how you would normally count your energy. You'd go add those up. Now, outputs are much more intense than inputs. So many academics and many tools say, ignore the inputs, let's just measure the outputs. Because the energy that goes, you first kind of send your tokens, they get sent into the model, into the KV cache, and that's not too expensive. But then when it becomes a matter of actually generating your answer, that takes a lot of compute. So the intensity of the decoding phase, the intensity per token of the output is much bigger than the input. Therefore, a lot of people, most people say, you can ignore the output pretty much, just focus on the input. And that works very well in this ideal scenario where we think and we are told to believe that we are talking to a model. But the reality is we are not talking to a model. We are talking to middleware. So let's tell Quen, please translate what your response was. And he goes, what? What do you mean? Because it has no memory. An LLM, the model itself, has no memory. You have to inject it. So now we start seeing that there is this bit of the iceberg that is growing under it. So this panel shows you the hidden middleware. So I made a mistake here, and instead of putting it in the prompt, I put it there, but it worked quite well as a kind of system prompt to say, answer in English in general. And the other thing is that we can also inject I think I did it again for another test. Now it answered in English. I think it took on board the system prompt at that point. Now, you can also see the temperature toggle there. The temperature means that the answers vary in size. So the higher your temperature, the more random and variable your outputs will be. And the lower your temperature, the more deterministic and repeatable they are. So these are toggles that are made by humans. Now we've injected the memory. And we're saying, elaborate on your first point. Now that we've done that, we are now, this is something you don't see. You just saw elaborate on your first prompt. But we've actually injected all of our conversation and sent it through. Now, as soon as it sort of finishes answering, we see that the answer is quite big. But now look at the overhead. This has all been injected now. This is the memory. This is now the memory. Now, if you think that every chat volley you are adding memory, after 5 volleys, you still think you've sent 50 tokens. But you're now actually starting to send hundreds. Now, the system prompts that are used by the main LLMs are gigantic. The Grok system prompt I'm trying there, this one will take a while because it will slow down, has 5,000 tokens. The Claude system prompt has 17,000 tokens. And every single time you send a message, you say, who won the game? What's the time? Tell me something. 17,000 tokens get added to your prompt, plus the memory. So suddenly this pre-fill, this input stage is much bigger. And almost all of our measures are missing by orders of magnitude the impact of our tokens. This is how Google gets to 1.3 quadrillion tokens in 1 month. The other thing you hear a lot is that this kind of thing only matters when you're doing coding or when you're doing research because you're sending a lot of stuff. But what I'm showing is that in your normal chat, this really, really matters. When I did it with the Claude system prompt, it lasted 28 minutes in this local CPU with this little balance. Now, this tool allows us to measure the electricity consumption both as an estimate. So these are benchmarks, and I've got 2. One is from a paper by Jenga Matul, where he modeled the impacts of all the various LLMs. The other is from Hugging Face, where I translated the real-time measurements in their energy score to per 1,000 tokens. It's really valuable to stop measuring by query and to start measuring by token. And to start measuring by token through electricity. And now that's complicated because, as I said, the outputs and the inputs are very different. So this application allows you to choose both per output tokens and per input tokens. And what we're doing is we are weighing them. We're normalizing. We're saying all the energy that you took to pre-fill will add on to the value of the output token and vice versa. So as you explore, you'll see how those metrics give you very different perspectives depending on what you're getting. But this basically begins to tell you that as you are using LLMs and as you are building LLMs, relying on the big proprietary models takes away enormous control and granularity. This app begins to show you not just what's going on under the surface, not just what we are not counting. You can see here the sort of, this was Grok. Can you see the size of the blue there? That blue is the system prompt. It's reversed the pre-fill, this complete common sense belief that we can ignore pre-fill because it's much less intense than outputs. In reality, for almost every chat is not true because of the quantity. Roughly at 1,000 tokens, you get a crossover point where prefill starts making a difference. So here you can check this. You can check also the carbon against sort of the energy grids. You have a map of like all the grids in the world kind of thing. And so you're able to begin to reason about these trade-offs. Now, the other thing you can reason about here is that the most optimal model will not necessarily be the best for your use. So if you start using Quen, I asked it to be or not to be, who said that? It was convinced it was Socrates. Then it had like many, many guesses, never thought it was Shakespeare. So maybe he had said it, but certainly not written it anywhere. So it's a trade-off, right? Which model you use for what? But this is really a call for you to take control. This becomes also something quite powerful economically. This is a very first draft of this app, and it's open source. But what I would like to also encourage is that you start tracking. Where do your tokens go? In what part of your applications? Is it now, all this that we've seen has focused on one chat. The other elements that you can add to your hidden middleware is this is a sort of live reading now of the power in my machine to actually determine how much electricity it used and how much it did in its first phase of pre-filling and how much it did in its decoding. So this kind of tool allows you to also begin to map what happens when you start using tools. So every time you do a chat and ask a small question like, who won the football game today? There's going to be 50 searches online. And those 50 searches, the results of them, fractions of them will be injected into the chat as well. So now you've got your little prompt. You've got your 17,000 tokens of your system prompt. You've got the memory of every single conversation you've had, both of you. You've had the search injection. And now you have the retrieval augmented generation, the RAG tools around memory, for example, and it starts growing. Now, this is what we can see. The reality is that all of these systems, again, you are not talking to an LLM. You're talking to 5 or 6 models. When you send your query, there's another model that takes all your tokens and processes them for filtering, another one that does it for ranking. So your tokens are being multiplied over and over beyond your GPT-5 or your Claude. So you have this extra layer of exponentiality. And finally, you have the agentic economy. What's really happening is that at the end of all that, it's being sent to an agent, which will do all over again the prompt, the context, the memory, to send it to another agent, to send it to another agent. And then we go back to our metrics and our academic papers, and we say, I had 20 input tokens and 200 output tokens. Let's measure my impact. So this is really, the documentation is available. It's quite extensive on every element. I'm proposing this concept of energy-weighted tokens. There's a couple of people working in a similar line. They're focusing more on outputs. I think there's value in both. Both distort something. Both tell you the truth. Both contain the full energy value, but they tell you a different story. So if you have, for example, 10,000 tokens and you measure by input, it's going to be a very small mark by input. Your energy reading will be very small because it's not being added. If you do it in outputs, it will be the other way around. Now, when you put it all together with this tool, the idea is that we need to be granular and we need to be careful. And we need to choose the mix of models that we want as opposed to delegated we don't need the 17,000 token system prompt because we're not serving everybody in the universe. So being able to identify the flow of your energy across an LLM system, being able to know that your impacts are literally thousands of times more than what it looks like. And finally, this is where I'd like to finish before opening it to the room for a bit of discussion, is that in everything, both alignment and energy, the discussion is focused on the models. When people demand transparency, they demand transparency about the models. What nobody's asking, I generally haven't seen a single, not one article, not one voice ask, not even the people suing ChatGPT for sort of aiding in a suicide. No one is asking for the software that is between us and the LLM. But that software, unlike the model, is deterministic. It's interpretable, it's corrigible, and it's accountable. And in my research, I've concluded it accounts for, I'd say 70% of what you see out. Yes, the model has its set of training and its outputs, but really the behavior that you observed is mostly, as we've seen with the energy, mediated by these very specific human decisions that are controllable. So I would invite you to bring that to the agenda, to ask for the software, to understand that it's a fiction that we are being told when we're saying we are talking to a model. And in the model lab, you will be able to see the difference between talking to a model that hasn't been fine-tuned, one that has been fine-tuned for different things, one that has become uncensored, and you'll see all of those things are, again, human inputs into the model that are corrigible and decipherable. Now, this is meant to be a workshop. So easy with like 50 people in the room, right? But what I'm going to invite you to do is to talk to the person next to you or the two people next to you. And I want you to think about 3 questions. One is, what is the main sort of thought of this? Is there an insight? Is there something that sort of speaks to you about what you've heard? 2, what are the implications for your use of LLMs? And 3, what are the implications from your perspective for the planet of this dynamic? So what spoke to you? How does this affect how you approach your engagement with LLMs? And where do you think this fits in the planet?